Welcome to today's episode of the Meet Your Mind online podcast. Today, we have a very special guest all the way from the USA. This is Teresa, and she is, in fact, my mentor, and she's kind of carried me along my healing journey. And I felt it wouldn't be fair to do a podcast on all of the healing and teaching everybody what I know when she is actually the person that's kind of taught me most of this. So, Teresa, thank you so much for coming on today. Why don't you tell? You don't need to tell me because I know who you are, but tell everyone else a little bit about you, and yeah, we can go from there.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for that lovely introduction. And I look at it from the perspective that I've been fortunate to be part of your healing journey. And I always feel honored when I can, be part of someone's healing journey because we heal together. That's how I look at it. And so, we help each other along the way. And it's been amazing working with you. And I've really enjoyed the work that we've done together. Um, yeah, I come from a background of, holistic healing practice with a lot of some education, a lot of personal study into psychology and also metaphysics. Have, practiced yoga and meditation and yogic lifestyle for quite a long time, just, as kind of my vehicle for maintaining some semblance of, of sanity in my world. And it's been a really amazing journey all along, and I've been grateful for the time that I've worked in the recovery realm as well.
That's great. And I think for me, I've kind of had to adopt that too, that holistic overview. And I think going into 12-step recovery, which, is what we both do in healing our trauma, I think it really helped to have, a little bit more of an open-minded view on what that looks like.
Yes, the word suddenly kind of popped in, the concept of spiritual bypass, because I think that was, when I was very young. I was quite young when I jumped into, the metaphysical world and decided to go off and, you know, move into an ashram and learn how to do yoga and meditation and work with a spiritual teacher and all that. I was just questing. I was just trying to understand myself, my world. And it was a great journey, but eventually I found myself really disillusioned and really frustrated and left that world and kind of found my way into, more of the kind of hands-on healing work and other realms along the lines of healing. But the best journey was when I discovered 12 step, because that brought me out of that spiritual bypass. And really, I realized that my first experience of doing the steps and going into the, surrendering to a higher power, that I really didn't have a real concept of what that was.
No.
And it was always something outside of myself that I was trying desperately to be approved by, to somehow impress, that I had to do things, to get that connection, and to actually really have a more personal connection was huge for me. And that was a big part of the healing process, I think. Just discovering that self-awareness and the higher power as the inner loving parent.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting because as you were talking then, I was thinking back to kind of my healing journey and what that looks like for me. And for such a long time, I spent it kind of on the cusp of both. So I understood and I learned about spirituality and trying to connect to something that's bigger than myself. And then at the same time, I was also completely in my own stuff and still attached to self, if it were. So I had to be right. I needed to be the one that did not the healing per se, because obviously it's my responsibility to heal, but I needed to be the one that saved myself. Does that make sense? So I was the one that needed to be
Absolutely.
the person that recovered, and I needed to do that all by myself. And I refused for a very long time to even go into therapy because I'd created this idea that if I can't do it, by myself, then I must be weak. And the, and whoever's listening to this, we're referencing something called the 12 steps of ACA, which is adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. And that's just one of many support groups that allow people that have done or that have been through, excuse me, trauma within their life or within their families to be able to kind of meet together, work through a process, heal together, understand what's happened to them, and also make waves on, getting to feeling better and effectively healing that part of them. And but for such a long time I refused to do that. I didn't want to accept or acknowledge that somebody else could help me effectively. And by actually surrendering to that idea, I was able to meet you and obviously start all of this wonderful things with, like, the podcast, for instance, and the business. So I think it's very interesting to look back on that, on how rigid I was at the fact that I just did not want any assistance, because I was to figure out this spiritual healing process all by myself, because then I wouldn't be weak. So yeah, I don't know. It just really propped up for me there, and quite interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that it's probably shared by a lot of people, that because I think one thing that happens, when we grow up in dysfunctional families, depending on the degree, depending on the circumstance, we often, especially if there was neglect, abuse, we kind of figure out how to take care of ourselves. We stop relying on other people, and we become, we definitely become very independent in that regard. On one hand, you could see that's actually a pretty good quality, to kind of be able to go out into the world and, deal with life and jump right in. But on the other hand, we start to notice, that one, we push people away. We have a difficult time with connection and closeness. We're afraid to ask for help. We don't allow people to come in, we block the very thing that we oftentimes feel that we're seeking because of that. So it's kind of like the self-reliance is an important survival tool. We just have to find that line where the self-reliance interferes with our ability to connect with others.
Yeah, that's so wild as well, because today I had this whole moment. I'm sat at work and I'm not talking to anyone. I don't want to engage. I find that anyone that's talking to me is stressing me out a little bit, and I'm like, what is going on with me? And I went out and I went for a sandwich with one of my colleagues, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And then 5 minutes later, he's like, No, seriously, are you okay? Have I done something wrong?" And I'm like, "No, you've done nothing wrong." I said, "You know what it is?" I went, "I'm bored." And he was like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "I'm bored. I have spent my whole life working towards this idea of getting peace and tranquility and healing. And I think that I'm in a place that's, like, relatively, I wouldn't say I'm completely there, obviously, but I'm definitely a lot calmer. There's no drama in my life right now. And I was explaining to him that what's stuck inside of my head at the minute is I'm so conditioned to be connected to chaos and drama, and that's familiar to me. And I said, so at the minute, what I'm doing is I'm self sabotaging. So anytime somebody wants to talk to me, I'm getting the hump. Or if something's not going right with work, I'm snapping and I'm just being really irritable. And I said, and what I'm noticing, hence why I'm not talking to anyone today, is I'm trying not to, number one, be mean to anyone, but I'm noticing I self sabotage. And that's what I'm doing. I'm self sabotaging because I am bored, because I'm so used to there being so much chaos. And that kind of goes back to that idea of, doing all these things on our own. And, like, so think of how long that we've come from that space of living in chaos to then trying to do this, like, new healing process then. And I'm sat there going, how am I self-sabotaging so wildly, just because I'm a little bit bored right now, because everything is what I've actually asked for. and something inside of me doesn't like that.
Right, and that's a really great reflection and reference of the journey that you've been on, and being able to look back and go, okay, before I would just be in complete chaos and I would just be, that's the whole thing. I would just be acting out of the default program and, leaving a path of of destruction, or whatever, And now to be able to just recognize that okay, this is what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. I can see it. Um, and that's what gives us that choice. We become yeah, you were a reactor, you become an actor. An actor chooses this path. They've taken that step back. It's like just taking that pause, that breath to feel into yourself and go, wow, okay, I feel really, really irritated. And I'm, just noticing those things and being aware that that's kind of what you do and making the choice. Maybe I'm just going to take a step back from this, or I kind of maybe I need to just take some space and do a little self-care or do something to bring myself back into a place of balance. And it's finding out what that looks like for you, what that feels like. So yeah, that's great work, and it's so good for us to recognize the progress that we've made. As they say, progress, not perfection, because it's those moments of just going, wow, okay, yeah, I see that. I'm aware that I'm doing that. And with that awareness, I can choose to do it differently. But it's not comfortable. You're right. It's kind of a discomfort. It's feel like, wow, I'm doing this thing.
And I'm so used to it being chaotic and insane. Like, and there's literally nothing. It's as if I definitely want there to be something wrong with my life. And I want to be able to complain, and I want to be able to say that this isn't working, so I can go back into that pity party that I'm so very good at creating. But it's nice to see that that doesn't have to be like that anymore. And I'm able to make those changes in my thought process and see that, do you know what, there actually isn't anything wrong in my life, and I am just creating more problems. A thought just came to me, and I think it might be a good idea to maybe talk about what that could look like. For, we've been working together for a really long time, so we've built this awareness, and especially with working with each other. But for, say, for instance, that somebody is on that beginning of their healing journey, or don't even realize that they need to heal from something, what would you suggest would be something that could maybe help somebody that is sat in that space?
Yeah, that's a good place to look at because I think in terms of things that were helpful for me even before I found recovery, was just the idea of starting to listen into my body, starting to be aware. Wow, I'm really kind of irritable, and this communication isn't going well, and knowing that I had the power, the difference as adults from maybe when we were in children, maybe in certain situations growing up where we felt helpless, and that nobody was listening, and there was no point in even saying anything, because no one's hearing us, or they're hearing us and not giving us a positive reaction to that, so it was, I remember just kind of recognizing, wow, I can tell the other person, hey, I'm just I kind of need to take a little space right now, or I'm just going to go take care of myself for a minute, maybe go do a little breathing, or just say, I'd really like to talk to you about this, but I kind of need to take a little space because I don't feel like I'm going to be able to, to communicate very well right now. It's just being able to recognize when we're off, when we're not being able to kind of be more present, and learning to just, those little cues sometimes can help, just listening in. And I think that's where, practices like doing, breath work, yoga, these things that get us a little more connected to our bodies. Our focus is always so out there, and being able to kind of go, oh yeah, I have this whole have this whole inner realm here
Yeah.
that I don't pay much attention to, So just kind of starting to be a little more mindfully aware of what we're feeling.
Yeah. No, I really like that. And I think that's the biggest thing that I have to always come back to is how does this feel inside of me? What is this feeling evoking? Why am I here? Have I been triggered by something or somebody? Am I triggering myself? Even like today. What does this look like for me? Is there anything actually wrong? And if I've done the deduction and there isn't anything wrong, then I'm able to look at everything. If I've done the deduction and there is something wrong, then I know that I can go and tell that person to fuck off, or like, or I could just do something that's going to make me feel a little bit better. Maybe not that aggressive, but I get to make that decision based off of the actual fact, rather than, like you're saying, rather than this reaction. When did you realize that there was a healing journey that needed to be had in your life?
I think at different points along the way, usually it coincided with a relationship. And I worked with various therapists at different times, because I it was kind of that first discovery of this is bigger than me. That was kind of the first realization, and I can ask for help. Those were kind of two as an adult child, it's kind of like we walk out into our adult world without all the tools, without all the developmental processes that normally would have prepared us to be a healthy adult,
Mm,
whatever that means. Essentially, someone a little more equipped, to handle certain things that may come up. And so, we just kind of feel unprepared, and then we find ourselves in situations, oftentimes relationships, because they reflect back to us, who we are. And that's where a lot of us, find our biggest difficulty. And so it's kind of like that was the first big step, was just recognizing, okay, I can't do this alone here.
mm,
This is bigger than me. This frustration, anger, whatever it is, feels overwhelming, and I need help. Um, and recognizing that that wasn't necessarily, that I'm weak or that I'm, incapable. It's just this particular area of my life. I'm just really not. I don't have what I need, and I need help. And that felt good. That was a big process, and then that opened the doors further on down the road, when at various junctures, when life was kind of really getting very overwhelming, feeling like things were really just falling apart. And again, I don't have the tools,
mm.
and asking for help, but figuring out what that help needed to be, and that's what finally brought me to recovery. I realized, well, counseling was great and helped me in a lot of areas, but I needed something more.
Yeah, I completely relate. And it's funny because I was speaking about this the other day as well, realizing that there's only so much talk. Well, you know me, I talk a lot. I've got a whole podcast, for God's sake. It's what I love to do is talk. And I knew that I couldn't talk about my problems any longer. I couldn't do that in the way that I was doing it. I had to do something different. And my normal way of thinking wasn't going to get me out of this because it hadn't done already. And I knew I needed something to shift my mindset or shift something inside of me. And I think, yeah, it boils down to it didn't feel right. And I read a meme or something today, and it was along the lines of someone asked their therapist, like, everybody has anxiety, right? And the therapist is like, no. And that's it. It's like we feel like sometimes we always have to sit in pain and discomfort and anxiety and le- like being lethargic because we're so caught up in our own heads all of the time. And but that's not the truth. And that's, I think, what recovery and going on this kind of healing journey did for me, is it showed me that I don't always have to be in my head or feel like it's always chaotic or that something is always going to go wrong. There is a place that is calm and can be peaceful for, at least some time of my day.
Yeah, and that's an important thing to, just recognize within yourself, to just acknowledge that um that doesn't have to be the norm, that 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 there's options, that there's a there's an optional way to be, in the world, and that anxiety is something that little by little, with that inner awareness, with that understanding, as we grow, that it becomes less and less, because we get better at self care, we get better at our positive routines, we get better at doing the things that keep us out of that state of anxiety.
Absolutely. And I think, we talk about this a lot as well, is that identifying that there was something wrong, and for me that was trauma. And I know what that looks like for me. And now, by going through and looking and even acknowledging that there was any type of trauma in my life, what do you think is a key indicator for someone to, if they are sat in that discomfort all of the time and they are looking for some kind of help? Do you think that, being aware of there being some kind of trauma, at any stage in our lives, and it doesn't always need to be so definitive on the fact that it was something extremely traumatic, but even like mini traumas that we can go through, even in daily life, like tripping over and people actually looking and laughing at us can, be stored in the body, and that create some kind of social anxiety. Do you think that that's something that should be kept, people should be aware of as they're going through this like journey, or awareness of per se a journey?
Right. Well, I think you kind of made the point. I think that as we're, kind of doing this life, like I said, we're walking into adulting out in the world, doing relationship, intimate, but also work relationship, friend relationship. I think just acknowledging when we start noticing maybe patterns, that was always a pretty good indicator for me, and certain behaviors, like you referenced anxiety. A big thing that a lot of times brings people into recovery is recognizing, first of all, and coming out of denial around certain addictions, and that can be addiction to a lot of different things. For me, it was I realized my addiction was to people, particularly that with my intimate partners, and pain that usually comes up when we realize, it's like we're kind of out of control. It feels like it's out of control, and sometimes that is enough to propel someone to kind of want to understand, want to get better. And, it's just kind of having that awareness, and I think there's just different points in life. I know in recovery, they talk a lot about hitting the bottom, hitting your bottom. And yeah, I think it's just certain points where, we're throwing our hands up, it's like, this is just too much. This is too hard. Like, I can't do this. I can't keep doing this. Something's got to give,
Mm.
and that usually kind of is enough of a motivation, but other things, I think, indicators are just, yeah, if you find yourself isolating from people, if you find yourself just really in a lot of constantly, like you referenced, having anxiety, just stress, a lot of times stress related, illness, sickness, things like that. Starting to notice, noticing patterns and wanting to change. Talking at the beginning of the year, this is when everybody's made their New Year's resolutions. There's this sense of wanting to change, wanting to do better, wanting to, be able to kind of show up in our world for the people that we care about. A lot of time, that's another big motivator for people, is realizing they want to show up better, for the people that they love and care about.
No, that's so true. And it's nice to be able to see and have that kind of separated as well. You know, these are the things that can come up for you, and this is what it can look like in your life. You were talking about relationships, and that's where the majority of the chaos kind of like came up for you. And wow, as you know, like that's where the majority of the chaos comes up for me too. And it's nice not to hear that that happened to you, but it's nice to hear that I'm not on my own when I go through this. You know, that I'm not the only person in the world that really struggled and, you know, sometimes still does struggle with relationships with other human beings. And I think it's in society now, I think we're built to be kind of told that we should just know. We should know how it should be. We should know how to interact with other human beings, and we should do it well. And if we don't do it well, then there's something wrong with us. But we're not going to tell you how to change it or how to do it different. But what we are going to tell you is that you're doing it wrong. And it will look like you're doing it wrong if you can't keep friends or intimate partners or, you know, glide through life like it's all so wonderful and it looks like it does on the on the adverts. And I think that is quite conflicting sometimes when we are going through, you know, healing whatever part of us that needs to be healed, if it needs to be healed, is like being really aware that it doesn't need to look like people say it should look or this idea of what we think it should look like. You know, healing relationships for me now looks like being able to sit with sit with anybody and not worry about whether or not they're judging me. You know, that's a nice place to be in now. I don't need everybody to love me. I'm okay with, you know, saying something that might not offend, but setting my boundaries, for instance. I'm okay with setting my boundaries now because I'm not terrified that somebody is going to leave me. That for me is healing that relationship part of, you know, my trauma. I don't know what that looks like for you, but that was a huge part of, you know, that area. Don't get me wrong, you know, I'm still working on the other sides of it and creating long lasting intimate relationships or whatever that may look like. But I think, you know, starting it with this idea that I need to be able to sit comfortably when I'm even in the company of other people was a massive starting point for me.
Right. Yeah, and you kind of brought up a really good point. I remember one of the things that was really powerful for me, was when I first started, going to 12-step meetings and sitting in a room, with a whole group of people and hearing everybody talk and going, "Oh my God!" Like all these people, they've experienced like similar stuff. They're going through similar stuff. It's that sense of like I'm not alone here, and it that journey has been so helpful, and that's one thing that I think is so important for people to realize that they're not alone, and that so many of us are struggling, even the ones that look perfectly well put together and they always show up on time, or the people that we envy, or we're like, we have no idea what's under the surface. We have no idea. And that's why a lot of times with people like that, when they completely fall apart, everybody's like, wow, what happened? Really good at masking it.
Mm,
And that was a really good point you mentioned too. We hear all this, like a lot of the self-help stuff, and you see it on Instagram, Facebook, like be yourself, be true to yourself, or all these things. And I remember I used to go, wow, like I'm so far from that, like I don't even know what that means.
mm,
Um, and again, sometimes we'll use that to sort of measure ourselves. And so I think it's important, to recognize that everybody's healing journey is their own. Everybody has their own way of healing. And it's important, for us to acknowledge that to ourselves. And if we're finding someone to work with us, that's important that we feel that they respect that process, that they respect our healing process and are willing to work with us. And that was helpful for me. I really was grateful for the people that healing process and work with me through that process. And so, it's a very intimate journey.
It really is. And just then, when you were saying about getting people to be able to respect where we are, is huge. When I was deciding to drink again after being sober for 2 years, I was very, very fortunate to have so many people respect that that decision, and that part of my journey. And even people in AA were like, Jess, we don't think that you're meant to be here because of an addiction. You've done a lot of work in lots of different areas. I was a tyrant. I was like, I must be healed now. I'll do it all now. And I wanted to feel better really right away. And it didn't happen like that, but I'm definitely glad that I did it that way, for sure, because I was just sick and tired of feeling like shit. But what I remember is there was no judgment, and I was surrounded by a lot of people that cradled me with respect and love and acceptance. And I think that's really important to find those people, because I think it would have been a completely different story if I had decided to make that step. And because I just didn't, I deducted again for quite some time that maybe that wasn't the place for me to be in. And that was okay, and it turned out okay. I feel I made the right decision. But if somebody was sat there telling me that I was wrong, or I wasn't good enough, or I was making a mistake, and they didn't allow me to make my own mistakes in order for me to learn, I think that would cut you off, a little bit, because you're not given the room to grow. I think without making any type of, and is it a mistake or is it just a lesson? I don't know. Like, would it have been a mistake if I'd left addiction recovery and realized that I was, in fact, addicted to substances, and i.e., alcohol and drugs? Would it that have been a mistake, or would that have just been a solidifying point to go, actually, no, maybe this isn't for me? And quite when we're doing any type of healing, when you said you're addicted to people, I also harbor that aspect. But if at any point someone's telling me you must stay away from relationships, or you must not do the thing that you are, trying to heal from without, then I don't feel like I'm ever going to learn. I'm never going to learn, and I think that's kind of the way I've looked at this whole healing process for myself, is that was I was hell bent on making my mistakes. I wanted to make the mistakes because I knew that I would learn. And I think that by being surrounded by really loving, kind, and people that can honor that, it makes that transition so much easier and so much kinder, because we're already beating ourselves up as we're going through it. You don't want someone else coming in with that hacksaw going, nope, you fucked this up a little bit more. We want someone to go, it's okay. I'm gonna cuddle you while you feel a little bit uncomfortable, and then we're gonna go through this together.
Yeah, I like that. That's important to reference, because that one of the things that always came up for me when I was working, that sense that, we all carry an innate wisdom. We all have our own inner wisdom, wisdom from experience, and kind of an inner wisdom. And I think the more and a lot of times, again, that's kind of a common trait when we've grown up, and we learn not to trust our own intuition.
Mm.
Oftentimes we may have been gaslighted, we may have been, just told we were wrong. We may have been, our feelings may have been just continually denied. Um, and we stop trusting. We stop trusting our own inner knowing. And yeah, and that was a really important point that you brought up about that sometimes we kind of have to make the mistake, or we have to kind of just venture in. But it's like this time we're going in, but we have a few more tools.
Mm.
We're not. It's like we're not walking in blind this time. And again, kind of trusting our inner wisdom. And then and sometimes we'll get into that situation and we'll be like, okay, yeah, I kind of got this. I'm doing okay. And other times we'll be like, okay, wow, okay, I really messed up with this one, but then we learn. Yeah, we learn. But having that support, like I love that term cradled, it's that sense of that, you're being held. And a lot of times I see it as like, we're being held essentially by that loving parent, that inner loving parent, that higher power, that higher wisdom that's within each of us, you know, reminding us that, we're okay, we're going to be okay. Um, and the more we start to trust that, the more, we're listening in, and we choose, um, we make better choices at that point, because we're listening. And that's when we kind of recognize, oh, okay, I think I need to step out of this, I need to back out of this. This feels toxic. This relationship, or, this habit isn't really something I want to continue doing.
Mm.
I think I want to find out what I need to do to not do it, in this way, or, it doesn't feel loving to myself.
No, that's fair. And it's wild to think that we actually do have that inside of us. That is like that is where now I get all of my guidance from. I I trained with a lot of help from you, to to start listening inside of myself. What does that feel like? And like circling right back to what we were talking about at the beginning with, those feelings of anxiety and those uncomfortable feelings, they're usually a highlighter. Well, they are for me anyway. If I feel uncomfortable now, I know that there's something wrong. Either I'm about to go into a situation that feels, familiar, that might not be good for me. Just because it feels familiar doesn't mean that it's necessarily the place that I should be. Because again, my default setting is chaos and absolute like mayhem. So, like feeling calm is different for me now. But now I know when I do feel uncomfortable or anxiety starts to creep in, I know that there's something wrong, and that's my kind of inner guidance saying, hey, 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 stay alert, be alert, look around you. We might need to make some difficult decisions here. We might need to set some boundaries. We might need to say to somebody that wasn't okay. Please don't treat me like that again. That's not kind, or remove myself from that situation. And I think it's really nice being able to be in a place of having a connection with myself again. And I think that's what it is, like that biggest relationship that I think I have always wanted and craved. And for so long I thought it was with my mum or with a man, or to have all these friends, to have all these people love me and cherish me. And in actual fact, the relationship that I honestly probably do need and want the most above all is that loving relationship with myself, to know that I can care for myself, I can give myself what I need, I can be by myself because I don't feel loneliness anymore, because I really enjoy sitting in bed office, eating noodles, watching Netflix, and laughing at in my own head. Like, I love that now. And it's such a nice place to be in. But I never realized that's what I was searching for all that time, is that reconnection with myself, that relationship with Jeff, period, you know?
Yeah, and that pretty much, sums up that whole idea of self-discovery, of learning to love ourselves. And it's funny because for a long time that I would hear that and it would kind of piss me off. So I'd be like, what does that even mean? Like I just, and because I just felt like I wasn't even sure if I liked myself all that much, and but that's part of the thing of coming, kind of as we gradually come out of denial, as we start to begin to look at ourselves, look at our past, and going back into, that's why I love the whole um, like you said, the inner guidance, inner guidance kind of starts with um, the journey into healing our inner child. And, as we go into that journey of healing our inner child, we start to recognize, we come out of denial around what that experience was as a child, and it's hard sometimes. I always remember thinking, yeah, I had a pretty normal childhood. I didn't have parents, slamming doors and screaming and fighting and any of that. They neither of my parents were directly you know uh, alcoholic or addicted, but I had grandparents, grandparents that was, and so it was there. The presence was there, and a lot of the generational dysfunction was there, and it took me a while to start to realize, okay, there was a lot of things that were not okay when I was growing up. There was a lot of points in my developmental process that I did not have that support, that I did not have, the encouragement, I didn't feel love. I didn't feel it. And so really wasn't even sure what that felt like, what that was. And, that's been a big part of my healing journey. Is, like you said, kind of learning to recognize what that feels like,
Mm.
and it is a really great feeling when we gradually start to, develop that connection. We develop a great amount of compassion. Um, we have more compassion for ourselves, and less judgment. And when we get to that place where we have that self compassion, um, we can walk ourselves through those difficult moments a lot easier because we're not judging. We're not like, oh my God, what a fuck up you are. Like just it's like, okay, all right, you're you're doing that thing again, and
Mm.
sometimes we can even reference back to a trigger. I'll just tell a quick little story here. I remember sitting at the table, a dinner table with my now husband and stepdaughter. And I'm sitting there and it's real quiet. We're all just eating. And I'm just like I'm fuming underneath because I can't stand when people chew with their mouths open. Okay, so I'm like sitting there and I'm getting so pissed off. I want to like throw something. But I know it's not them. I know it's me. I know it's my stuff. And I finally just said, "Okay, you guys, I got to say something. I got to say this. I'm getting really upset that you guys are chewing with your mouths open." And the funny thing is, I know that it's not really what I'm really upset about.
Yeah.
And then I said, what I'm really upset about is I remember my father used to take us out. We'd go out maybe, a couple times a month out to dinner, and we had to behave perfectly, you know. And I remember one time my brother was chewing with his mouth open or doing something. He was breaking the rules. Um, and my father seriously launched a fork, you know, at my brother, like,
Mm.
and it, hit almost by, he had his elbow on the table, but it brought me back to that moment of tension, and that was, I became like the good child. I figured it out. This is what you don't do. These are the rules. And it brought me back to that place of awareness around, this is not okay. This is not cool. Um, I'm not upset that these people are suing. I'm upset that I'm worried they're going to get into trouble.
Yeah.
And and it was just that kind of moment. And then we just kind of all laughed about like the whole thing, and and I was able to let it go. But it's like in that moment, I was able to reference back and then have compassion for that child that
Mm.
was so scared, you know sitting there at the table, like not wanting to do anything wrong. And, these people they're breaking the rules,
Yeah.
and that was what it was. But yeah, so
That's it. That's like
interesting.
that's such a good story. I'd be like, wow. And that just took me back to so many times where I've sat in exactly the same spot. I was at that dining room table just like with you then, and it's powerful to be able to acknowledge when we're in a position based off of something that has happened so long ago, based off of something where we had to sit in survival mode. We had to show up. We had to, like you say, follow those rules. And then we're just let out, we're let out into the world. And then it's like, so we've given you all of these really unreadable, ununderstandable rules. And now you need to go figure them out in this big wide world with no help. And some of them are good, some not so good. We're not going to tell you which one, and that's conflicting, and that's hard, and I think it's even more confusing when, we are sat at those dinner tables with our families or our friends or those new people that we are trying to live, work, and, cohabitate with. It's difficult to acknowledge where these things are if we haven't done that work. If we haven't done that inner work that we were talking about earlier, like being able to connect with ourselves and go, do you know what, this sounds a lot like my mum, or this sounds a lot like my dad, and I'm picking this out at the minute, and I'm taking this out on you because I wasn't able to, as a child, defend myself or stand up for myself, and you are reminding me of this person, so you are now going to get that unresolved pain that is still sat in my heart.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing when we recognize it, I one of my big ones is abandonment, and, and I recognize that, and I went back in and did a lot of work, in my inner child and family of origin, and recognized there was a lot of times when I felt abandoned, and particularly by my father. And so in my relationship, whenever I would start to feel abandoned, it would trigger this stuff, and I'd get angry. I'd be angry at them, and I was I got to a place where I was just so tired of being so angry all the time,
Mm,
and I wanted to really know what that was about, and that was when it just kind of started dawning on me that I was feeling abandoned, and I didn't know how to ask for what I needed. I didn't know how to set up boundaries. I didn't know how, to do that. And the more that I understood that that was something, that as an adult I can do, and I had to practice. And I remember sometimes it would feel really awkward. And yet surprisingly, little by little, I was able to start getting more of what I needed, and also to relax around everything's okay. I'm not being abandoned here. This person isn't going away. Um, I'm gonna be okay. But yeah, and there again, like you said, it's just that watching ourselves in those moments, you know, and seeing how we're responding or reacting.
absolutely. And also knowing that it's safe to do something different and to tread a little bit lighter with ourselves. And I think that was the biggest thing for me, knowing that I was on, like, so for a really long time, I felt like I wasn't really moving. So I was doing all this work and nothing was really changing. And nothing was, because I'd kept coming up with the same feelings and the same issues, and it really felt like I was stagnant. But what I didn't realize was that I wasn't, yes, I was coming up with the same issues and the same problems, but I was being given the opportunity to make different choices. So even though it felt stagnant and like I wasn't getting everything that I wanted there and then, I had to be really, and hindsight's wonderful. I only realized this after the fact. I was hardly sat there in the middle of like one of my temper tantrums going, why won't this change? Going, oh, actually, no, it's just another lesson. It will be fine. It didn't work like that for me. It was really painful. It was really uncomfortable. And I cried a fucking hell of a lot at the beginning of last year. I did a lot, but what I didn't realize was that it was okay, and that what was happening was safe because I was learning to make new choices. I was learning to choose to feel different. I was learning to speak how I felt. I was doing all the things that I'd never been given an opportunity to do, and I was doing them. And that's why it felt uncomfortable and that's why it felt stagnant, was because I was literally getting on that bicycle, learning to pedal, falling off, getting on that bicycle, learning to pedal, falling off, getting on that bicycle, learning to pedal, falling off. And then one day I got on that bicycle and I learned to pedal and I kept riding, and sometimes I might fall off, but it'll be very quickly, and then I'll be right back on that bike and we'll carry on again. And I think that was what is so lovely about being able to do this healing, this learning to love ourselves, this coming into something wholesome, and finding that higher power. I always get scared about talking about spirituality because not everybody gets it or wants to get it, but that is it. That is what did it for me, was being able to jump into that higher power and know that there's something else out there and it isn't me. And it's okay to be able to want to believe in something bigger than myself. And I think that was really important for me to understand as well.
Yeah, and that's really good points there. I think it is so important to realize, and say, um, there's times in the healing journey when, yeah, it is just really freaking hard. I mean, it's, it's like, um, I think I remember my father using this phrase, paddling upriver, up the molasses river or something in winter. Anyway, it's like it's hard, and that's why I always was grateful to be reminded, to do the gentleness break, to like, take a step back, what do you need to do? Do you need to take a sick day and just stay in bed all day? It's like really, it's that loving self care. And sometimes, as we come out of our denial, it's kind of like on one hand, I would be excited about the discovery. Wow, that's really what happened. And now I'm really seeing it. I'm really clear. And then there's this part where I just go, fuck, like that, yeah, that really happened. Like, that's so sad, and
Mm,
I just, like, I had to, like, grieve for that, my little inner child, and for how hard that was for her, growing up in these situations, and, and now as an adult, that I still, carry that, and, need to really honor that process, that sometimes we have to just grieve and go through that part and then come around to the other side, where we finally feel like, we can go on, and yeah, connecting with that loving being, whatever that is for us, that loving higher power, that sense of something, you know bigger than us, kind of being there, whatever that is for you. Um, and that took me a while too. I really was I really had, it took me a while to figure out what that was. I had everybody else's idea of, what that was. But it wasn't mine. I had to find my own experience and, find how that works for me. And, yeah, and I've had so much gratitude for that process, and then to like go, wow, I feel it. It's there. Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time today to come on to the podcast and talk about your experience with everything. It's just been so phenomenal. I haven't been able to stop smiling the whole time. So I'm really, really grateful for everything you've spoken about and, yeah, taking the time today.
Oh, it's totally my pleasure. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I'm just always grateful to share my journey and just really honor everyone in their healing journey.